The Xperia 1 Mark III is a huge step in the right direction for Sony, and is arguably their best ever smartphone to date. But can it compete against the best Android flagship device of the year so far, the Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra, in the speed test? Well, it's going to be pretty close to call considering they have very similar specifications on paper. They both house Qualcomm's latest and greatest 5nm processed node run Snapdragon 888 chipsets. They both have 12 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM, and they both have UFS 3.1 storage. They have both been updated to their latest available software, that being Android 11 on both devices with near stock experience on the Sony. And the Sony has a 4K display while the Samsung has a WQHD Plus display, and they both have 120Hz refresh rate panels, something that is a first for Sony this time around. I've made sure to disable all forms of battery optimizations on both devices and keep the animation scales locked at 1x on both phones. Round 1 will be all about boot fingerprint and face unlock, round 2 will be all about initial opening app speed, and round 3 will be all about RAM management. Using my fingers over here, so to keep things accurate, we're popping GoPro footage to the bottom left hand corner. This is TechNick, and without further ado, let's go! We're going to kickstart round 1 off here with a simple boot to see which one can power on quicker than the other. It is indeed the Xperia 1 Mark III with 19 seconds as opposed to 24.5 seconds on the Samsung, getting the Xperia its first point here. Going into the phone for the first time, refreshing the app icons and going to the home screen, the Xperia 1 Mark III did it a hell of a lot quicker than that of the Samsung, picking up its second point. And testing out the fingerprint sensor here, we have an ultrasonic one under the screen of the Samsung and a physical one side mounted on the right hand side of the Sony. The Samsung was quicker every single time around there, and unfortunately there is no option for facial recognition on the Sony, so I couldn't test that one out. Closing off round 1 with 2 points on the Sony as opposed to 1 point on the S21 Ultra. Going into round 2 over here, testing out all the apps to see which one can open it up quicker. The Sony was quicker in opening up the settings app, quicker than that of the S21 Ultra, picking up its first points in round 2, while the Samsung and Sony were neck and neck when opening up the calculator app. And I must just say that I did make sure that the brightnesses were set to max at the start of round 2, as well as hooked to the same Wi-Fi network, and all apps closed in the background. Going into our third system app here, which is the camera app, the Xperia 1 Mark III opens it up quicker, and flipping to the selfie cam, it was too close to call. Taking the snap, the Sony took it quicker and saved it to gallery quicker, picking up its third points as opposed to the 0 points on the S21 Ultra. Going into gallery, the Sony actually opened the app up quicker, but the Samsung loaded the page quicker, so no point was allocated over there, but the Sony did indeed open the photo that we just took slightly quicker than that of the Samsung, picking up its fourth points as opposed to the 0 on the Samsung. Going into Adobe Photoshop Express over here, the Sony was quicker in going into the application, and it was quicker in opening up the photo, but the Samsung actually loaded the whole page quicker, so once again no point allocated that time around. But the Sony did indeed save the photo to gallery, exporting slightly quicker than that of the S21 Ultra. Going into Adobe Premiere Rush, a video editing program over here, an application. Obviously going into the Sony, it was quicker in going into the app and into the project, picking up its 7th and 8th point over here. Now we're going to compress a 4K 25 FPS video down to 1080p, match the frame rates of 25 frames per second. I'm going to leave it at real time here. I'm not going to speed it up. Bottom right hand corner, as you can see, it says 100%. And the Sony is going a tad quicker than that of the S21 Ultra, picking up its 9th point over here, doing it in just 7.5 seconds, 2 seconds quicker than that of the S21 Ultra's 9.5 seconds. The next app that we'll be jumping into today is Spotify, and going into this one, the Samsung decides to snatch its first point here. 1 point on the Samsung as opposed to 9 on the Sony, which is absolutely dominating over here. Going into Astral VPN, since we need a VPN here in China in order to get into the remainder of the apps in this test, the Sony opens it up quicker, now getting into that double-digit point phase with 10 points as opposed to 1 on the Samsung, and enabling the VPN was too close to call on both devices. Going into our first app that requires a VPN here in China is Google Chrome, and going into that one, the Sony, no surprise, opens that one up slightly quicker as well. Now the Samsung has been around a lot longer than the Sony, so you would expect it to be slightly more optimized, but that's where you're wrong, because the Sony is actually more optimized with Android since it's so darn near stock, where Samsung has a pretty heavy skin on top of it. Going into Facebook, it was too close to call since they open up different things at different times with the same end result, but the Samsung did indeed open up Instagram slightly quicker than that of the Sony. Going into Twitter, once again too close to call here, so no point was allocated. So far so good for the Sony, 11 points as opposed to 2, not so good for the Samsung, 2 points over there. Going into YouTube over here, slightly quicker on the Sony, picking up its 12th point, and going into my profile, if we can ever find it, since there's the new incognito mode, jumping into that one, the Sony once again snags another point, making 13 points on the Sony as opposed to just 2 points on the Samsung. Going into one of my videos on YouTube, the Sony opened it up quicker, played it quicker and loaded the whole page quicker as opposed to the Samsung, picking up its 14th point. Going into our next video streaming service, which is of course Netflix. I'm pretty sure you guys have heard of it. Jumping into that one, the Sony was quicker in opening it up, but the Samsung went into my profile slightly quicker over there, making it 15 points on the Sony and 3 points now on the S21 Ultra. Going into our first benchmark of 2 here, Geekbench 5 version 5.4.1. Running the benchmark, I've sped it up bottom right hand quarter and then slowed it down after the Sony gets the point. 16 points now, 2 minutes 36 seconds as opposed to 3 minutes and 37 seconds on the Samsung. Usually the Samsung gets a single core of over 1,000 and a multi-core close to 3,000, but this time it was pretty much half that in terms of single core, which is pretty strange, and the Sony did better than what the Samsung usually does anyway, so the point was definitely allocated and awarded to the Sony Xperia 1 Mark III. Going into our second benchmark over here, which focuses more on graphics and not so much on CPU like we saw in the previous benchmark, which was Geekbench. This is 3D Mark Wildlife. This is just a 1 minute little stress test, nothing too strenuous on the device. 1 minute 10 seconds for the Sony as opposed to 1 minute 14 seconds on the Samsung, with 34 FPS on the Sony as opposed to 30.7 frames per second on the Samsung. Once again, Sony taking the crown over here with 17 points as opposed to just 4 points on the Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra. Going into our first game of 4 here, which is Subway Surfers. Jumping into this one, it usually loads pretty similarly on Android devices. Not this time around, it is indeed allocated toward the Sony, now picking up its 18th point with just a second or two behind that, the Samsung opening up the same game. Going into our second game over here, third last game of the third last game of the 4 games and 20 apps over here. Temple Run 2, sped it up, slowed it back down. Sony Xperia 1 Mark III picks up its 19th point. Can it make it to 20? Sorry to say, Samsung, there is no way of coming back even if you get 8 points in the last 2 games. Second last game over here is Among Us. Really great game. I'm sure you guys have played it before. Going into this one, strangely enough, the Samsung Galaxy S21 Ultra opens it up quicker, but just a smidge of a second quicker than that of the Sony, making it 5 points on the Samsung as opposed to 19 points on the Sony Xperia 1 Mark III. Going into our last game over here, which is PUBG Mobile, a little bit longer to load than previous games that we've just been opening. It does crop the borders on the Sony when in full screen gesture mode. That is fixed when in 3-button mode, but of course the Sony picks up its 20th point here, as opposed to the 5 points on the S21 Ultra, locking up round 2 with 4 times the speed as opposed to the S21 Ultra. Good on you, Sony. Going into RAM management over here, I only allocate points if one phone keeps an app open and the other one kills it, or vice versa. If both of them kill it, no point is allocated. If both of them keep it open, no point is allocated. The Sony kept Photoshop Express open where the Samsung killed it, so it got allocated a point. Earlier when we opened up the camera app, the Sony didn't have it flipped facing forward, but it doesn't have the option to keep the mode that was last used where the Samsung does, so it kept that facing forward, but they actually both kept the app open in the background. Going into Facebook over here, they had to reload things on the page, both of them, but they did both keep them open. Same thing with Instagram and Twitter, and with YouTube, it still stayed on my profile on both devices, so no point was allocated over here. And going into Netflix, jumping into that one, once again, no point allocated since they both kept them open. Same thing with Geekbench 5 and 3D Mark Wildlife. Subway Surfers was killed on both devices, so once again, no point allocated over there. Both devices kept Temple Run 2 open, both of them kept Among Us open, and of course both of them have also kept PUBG Mobile open, meaning that they pretty much did neck and neck in terms of RAM management. No surprise over here since they're both flagship phones. So to score here, 23 for the Sony as opposed to just 6 points on the S21 Ultra. And if we just focus on raw speed, raw performance, that is round 2, 20 points on the Sony, 4 times that of the Samsung's 5 points. And this time I did something a bit different. I added battery drain over here. It took 21 minutes to do the test. Both of them drained by 7% battery, but because the Samsung has a slightly bigger battery, it actually had a worse milliamp hour per minute reading. This is TechNick, and I'll catch you in the next one.